Monsters encapsulate humanity's natural fear of the unknown, which is why they regularly play a role in horror stories. On the other hand, humans can be fully aware of the consequences of their behavior, yet may not hesitate to commit atrocities so long as they have something to gain. And that can turn out to be much, much worse. So let's take a look at some. I'm Adam, this is What Culture Horror, and here are some horror movies where the monster isn't the scariest part. Night of the Living Dead. George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead didn't just pioneer what would become the zombie subgenre, but it also highlighted that people can be their own worst enemies too. The story begins with Ben and a group of strangers being attacked by reanimated corpses, urging them to seek refuge in a nearby farmhouse. Ben boards up the windows and doors to keep the flesh-eating ghouls at bay while he formulates a long-term plan. Despite facing an unprecedented threat, Ben shows formidable inner strength, taking control of the situation and devising practical solutions to secure the safety of the group. But Ben's actions are all for naught, since he's repeatedly disregarded and contradicted by his peer, Harry, who's desperate to showboat his authority. Harry's interference leads to a breakdown of trust, allowing the ghouls to overwhelm them, proving that a single weak link can break the chain. Although Ben is the sole survivor of the night, he's fatally shot the following morning by a local after being mistaken for a zombie. This tragedy further embellishes how a lack of communication in a crisis can be more dangerous than the crisis itself. His House. Netflix original His House kicks off with refugee couple Bol and Rial escaping from war-torn southern Sudan and finding sanctuary in the UK. Although they're placed in a dilapidated house and face racism on a daily basis, Bol and Rial hope to make the best of their situation. However, their lives are turned upside down again when they discover a demonic spirit called an Apeth resides in their home, compelling them to relive their worst times of their lives. Forced to watch their friends and neighbors being executed over and over, it isn't long before Bol and Rial reach their breaking point. But the Apeth doesn't just make the couple re-experience their past, it urges them to acknowledge their sins. In the climax, it's revealed that Bol and Rial kidnapped a girl and passed her off as their daughter while leaving South Sudan, believing they had a better chance of receiving sanctuary if they had a child. The girl died soon after, meaning their already unforgivable act was for nothing. Even if Bol and Rial banish the Apeth for good, they'll never be able to undo their past. Apostle. Gothic drama Apostle follows former missionary Thomas Richardson as he travels to a remote island to rescue his sister from a cult. According to the cult's leader, Malcolm, sacrifices must be made to the goddess, who will then use her power to provide prosperity and protection to the community. At first, it isn't clear if the goddess is real or if Malcolm concocted this whole scheme to suit his own needs. But in the third act, Thomas confirms the goddess's existence when he discovers the ancient deity inside a barn. However, Thomas learns that the goddess isn't an all-powerful being but a withered prisoner. Malcolm and his cohorts force-feed her sacrificial blood, compelling her to empower their community against her will. Not only that, but Malcolm also intends to impregnate his female subjects and sacrifice their offspring to the goddess to sustain the cult indefinitely. Thomas kills the goddess as he intended, but performs the deed out of mercy rather than revenge, since he feels sorry for her. Although the goddess is set up to be a master manipulator of Malcolm, it was actually the other way around. Trick or Treat. It may have bombed at the box office, but Trick or Treat has since developed a prominent cult following. Although the anthology horror comedy is hilarious and tightly written, it's primarily known for how it pulls the wool over viewers' eyes again and again. Each subplot centers around a supernatural beast, which is initially perceived as a conventionally nefarious creature. But by the end of every chapter, you find yourself rooting for the monster, honestly, since they end up targeting somebody who's irredeemably wicked. Sure, werewolves are scary, but it's satisfying to see them tear apart a serial killer. After watching Trick or Treaters bully an innocent girl, it's hard to blame her when she leaves them to be eaten by zombies. And even though Mr. Krieg is a cantankerous old git, you feel bad for him when he's tormented and tortured by the Halloween spirit Sam. Well, until it's revealed that Mr. Krieg led a group of disabled children to their deaths, that is. Even if the monsters in question are malicious, watching their malevolent victims getting their comeuppance should leave anyone smiling from ear to ear. Under the Shadow. Set in Tehran during the War of the Cities, Under the Shadow revolves around a mother and her daughter who are ordered to remain in their apartment to avoid being caught in the crossfire outside. But after a sinister djinn invades the flat and attempts to possess the daughter, the mother has to decide whether it's safer to flee. Although the djinn is unsettling in itself, it feels like an extension of the war, since it's unwelcome, unpredictable, and hostile. The apparition manifests after the father of the family is sent to fight at the front line, and haunts the mother more intensely every time a bomb goes off or an air raid siren is heard, indicating its existence is tied to the ongoing conflict. Though the djinn is only targeting the mother and daughter, they're the last people in the complex to evacuate, emphasizing that the mother believes what lies outside the walls possesses a greater threat. Even though the mother and daughter escape in the end, it's heavily implied that the djinn will continue to harass them, symbolizing that the trauma induced by the war will follow them no matter where they go. And I want to say a big thank you to everyone for watching this video today, and I want to turn the question on you. What's your example of a film where a scary monster isn't actually the biggest threat and is something that appears less imposing? Make sure you let us know down in the comments, and while you're there, give us a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Alright, let's jump back into the list. C.H.U.D. In Douglas Cheek's creepy B-movie C.H.U.D, photographer George Cooper notices that a large number of homeless people in New York have mysteriously disappeared. When George learns that the Manhattan sewers are infested with man-eating mutants called cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers, aka C.H.U.Ds, he assumes they're responsible for the unhoused population going missing. Due to the creature's ferocity and grotesque appearance, it's easy to perceive them as evil incarnate. However, these subterranean beasts have a tragic backstory. George ultimately discovers that toxic waste was illegally dumped in the sewers by a corrupt company called NRC, mutating the unhoused people there into C.H.U.Ds. Rather than taking responsibility for their actions, the NRC simply denies the problem. To avoid being discovered, the NRC fills the sewers with poisonous gas, hoping to rid the city of mutants and the homeless in one fell swoop. Even though George and his allies are in the sewers when the NRC puts this plan into action, the company doesn't hesitate to carry it out, since they can't risk being exposed by witnesses. As frightening as the C.H.U.Ds appear to be, they are merely a byproduct of one of the darker sides of humanity. 10 Cloverfield Lane. 10 Cloverfield Lane opens with an engaged woman, Michelle, being badly injured in a car accident. She awakens in an underground bunker with survivalist Howard, who insists that an unknown enemy has left the area uninhabitable. Growing suspicious of Howard, Michelle must decide whether she'll be safer on the outside. Due to the lack of expedition and Howard's unknown intentions, the tension is through the roof. The cat and mouse dynamic between Michelle and Howard is riveting, to the point where it overshadows the outside threat. By the time Howard kills his subordinate and assaults Michelle, she's dead set on escaping. But when Michelle leaves the bunker during the climax, she's actually shocked to see that an alien invasion is underway. Even though the space invaders pose a far greater threat, they don't instill the same level of fear as Howard. Despite depicting himself as a protector, Michelle never knows what Howard is planning or when his next mood swing is coming, so she's constantly on the edge. The fact that she can't escape the bunker at first makes her feel like she's caged up with a wild animal. Although Michelle's survival is very unlikely against the aliens, she was facing certain doom if she remained with Howard. The Host. Rather than saving the monster for later, the tadpole-like kaiju, Huemul, appears within the first 10 minutes of The Host. The introduction certainly doesn't bother with subtlety, since the monster is first seen trundling into the middle of Seoul with no build-up, chasing and killing the locals. Even though this is a magnificent sequence, the prologue is actually more haunting, where the movie starts with pathologist Douglas telling his assistant Kim to dump formaldehyde down the drain. Though Kim emphasizes that the drain leads to the Han River, all it takes is a little bit of calm coaxing from Douglas to carry out the orders. With Kim emptying the bottles, the camera pans across the table, showing hundreds of containers ready to be dumped. Unsurprisingly, it's later revealed that these chemicals infected the aquatic life of the Han, causing one critter to mutate into a huge monster. As dangerous as it is, what makes it even more frightening is the fact that it was created through bureaucratic negligence. Although Douglas's lack of ethics is unacceptable, Kim's behavior is arguably worse. He acknowledged the dangers of their actions, yet poisons the water anyway. Children of the Corn. In the 1984 adaptation of Stephen King's Children of the Corn, a couple stumbles into a rural town that's controlled by a cult of children. Just to make matters worse, the cult leader, Isaac, intends to sacrifice the pair to an entity called He Who Walks Behind the Rose. Logically, Isaac should be nowhere near as intimidating as this ancient deity, since he's soft-spoken and physically unimposing, even compared to his subordinates. Meanwhile, He Who Walks Behind the Rose is godlike, immortal, and unknowable. And yet, Isaac is the one who inspires overwhelming fear. Isaac knows he can't overpower others with his brawn, forcing him to rely on manipulation, turning faith into fanaticism. His calm demeanor and unwavering certainty in his duty highlight how effortlessly he wields his power. Of course, the scariest thing about Isaac is the fact that he's 9 years old. Instead of watching cartoons or playing with toys like a regular boy, this maniac formulated a death cult and convinced all of the town's children to slay their parents. He Who Walks Behind the Rose may be immensely dangerous, but Isaac is more likely to get under your skin. 28 Days Later. In Danny Boyle's apocalyptic horror 28 Days Later, a virus spreads throughout Britain, turning most of the population into zombie-like creatures. A bicycle courier, Jim, bands together with some other survivors hoping to find sanctuary. When Jim's group discovers a military compound run by Major Henry West, they believe the nightmare is over. But they quickly learn they've traded one hellish scenario for another, as Henry informs Jim that he only welcomed his group so he could turn Jim's female party into sex slaves. As frightening as the infected are, West's group is infinitely worse. With their training and weaponry, they could bring in survivors and eliminate hundreds of the mindless ghouls. Instead, they take advantage of the situation, using it as an excuse to indulge in their urges, preying on women and even children. Henry uses a radio broadcast to lure survivors to his fortress, with the false promise of a cure, highlighting how manipulative he really is. He gaslights Jim, trying to convince him that his unforgivable actions are for the greater good since they boost morale among his ranks. Although facing the infected seems like certain death, most people would probably take their chances with them over Henry's squad.